2026 is not just another year. Something is already shifting beneath the surface, and most people won't understand what's happening until it's too late. This video is not about predictions or dates. It's about a psychological shift that Carl Jung warned about long before our time. If you feel restless, detached, or strangely alert right now, 2026 may mark a turning point in how consciousness itself is experienced. Years do not change the world. States of consciousness do. According to Carl Jung, history moves in cycles driven not by technology or politics alone, but by shifts in the collective psyche. When old ways of meaning collapse, new psychological patterns emerge. 2026 is not significant because of events. It is significant because of pressure. Pressure builds when the collective unconscious can no longer sustain the identities, values, and illusions it once relied on. When this happens, people feel internally before it becomes visible externally. You may already sense it. Motivation feels unstable. Certainty feels artificial. Noise feels overwhelming. Jung believed these sensations appear when a civilization approaches a threshold moment, a point where the psyche demands reorientation. In such periods, people split into two groups: those who cling harder to old structures, and those who feel pulled inward, questioning everything. 2026 intensifies this divide, not because something new suddenly appears, but because what is false becomes impossible to ignore. The unconscious begins withdrawing energy from systems that no longer carry meaning. This creates anxiety, confusion, polarization, and emotional fatigue on a massive scale. But it also creates awakening. Jung warned that when consciousness expands too quickly, many experience disorientation. Old identities dissolve faster than new ones can form. This is why transitional periods feel chaotic. 2026 marks a deepening of this process. It is not the beginning. It is the point where denial becomes difficult. People feel exposed psychologically, emotionally, existentially. Some will harden. Some will fragment. Some will wake up. And those who are already inwardly oriented, sensitive, reflective, self-aware, will feel this shift most strongly, not because they are weak, but because they are early. When pressure builds in human psyche, it does not disappear quietly. It leaks. According to Carl Jung, what is not consciously faced by individuals accumulates in the collective unconscious. Over time, this accumulation forms what Jung called a collective shadow, the sum of denied fears, repressed instincts, unresolved trauma, and unexamined beliefs shared by society. The collective shadow does not emerge randomly. It emerges when denial becomes unsustainable. As 2026 approaches, the intensity many people feel is not caused by a single event or future prediction. It is caused by a psychological backlog. Too many unresolved contradictions. Too many false identities. Too many lives lived for survival rather than meaning. For decades, modern society has emphasized speed, productivity, appearance, and external success. These values kept things moving, but they did not nourish the inner life. Jung warned that civilizations that neglect the inner world eventually pay the price psychologically. When meaning is replaced by distraction and truth is replaced by performance, the unconscious begins to revolt. This revolt does not announce itself. It shows up as tension. People feel angrier without knowing why, more anxious without a clear cause, more reactive, polarized, and defensive. This is a collective shadow pressing against consciousness. As the shadow grows, people unconsciously seek someone to place it. They project it onto other groups, other beliefs, other identities. Blame becomes a coping mechanism. Jung believed that projection is the psyche's last defense against self-awareness. Rather than facing inner contradiction, people externalize it. This is why periods of psychological transition are often marked by hostility, tribalism, and moral absolutism. The world feels louder not because people are speaking more truth, but because they are speaking from unintegrated emotion. Approaching 2026, this pattern intensifies, not because humanity is getting worse, but because suppression is failing. The old psychological agreements are breaking down. The agreement to ignore exhaustion, the agreement to deny emptiness, the agreement to pretend certainty still exists. As these agreements weaken, the shadow surfaces. People feel exposed, and exposure without understanding feels like threat. This is why many people respond with rigidity. They cling harder to ideologies, labels, certainties, simplistic explanations. Jung warned that when ego feels threatened, it becomes primitive. It retreats to black and white thinking. Nuance disappears. Complexity feels dangerous. This is not regression. It is defensive simplification. But simplification cannot hold reality for long. As 2026 draws closer, the gap between outer structures and inner truth widens. Many people will feel a sense of impending change without being able to name it. They may feel restless but unmotivated, alert but directionless, engaged yet emotionally numb. This is not apathy. It is a psyche sensing that something fundamental is shifting. Jung believed that large-scale psychological change begins inwardly, long before it appears in external events. History records wars, revolutions, and collapses, but psychology records why they were inevitable. The inevitability comes from unintegrated shadow. When too much is denied for too long, consciousness is forced to expand, whether people want it to or not. This is what makes the period leading into 2026 so intense. The unconscious is no longer content with half-truths. It is demanding confrontation. For individuals, this confrontation shows up as inner questioning. For societies, it shows up as instability. But instability is not always destruction. Sometimes it is reorganization. Jung believed that breakdown often precedes breakthrough, not because suffering is noble, but because truth requires space. The collective psyche is clearing space, and clearing space is never gentle. Sensitive, introspective, and self-aware individuals feel this pressure first because they are already in dialogue with the unconscious. They sense what others avoid. They feel the tension before it becomes visible. They feel the weight before it is named. This does not mean they are meant to fix the world. It means they are attuned to the process. 2026 is not about catastrophe. It is about exposure. Exposure of false narratives. Exposure of hollow identities. Exposure of lives built without inner consent. And exposure always feels uncomfortable, but it is also the beginning of honesty. Sensitive and self-aware people are not sensing the psychological shift leading into 2026 because they are anxious, pessimistic, or overly imaginative. They are sensing it because their inner orientation is already aligned with the deeper layers of the psyche where change originates. According to Carl Jung, collective transformation does not begin in events, institutions, or technologies. It begins in the unconscious, long before it becomes visible on the surface of history. Individuals who are inwardly attentive, reflective, and emotionally perceptive naturally register these movements earlier because they are less defended against inner signals. While many people maintain psychological stability by relying on routine, external validation, and shared assumptions, sensitive individuals rely on coherence, meaning, and inner truth. This makes them less insulated from change. As the collective unconscious begins withdrawing energy from identities, values, and systems that no longer hold psychological legitimacy, sensitive people experience this withdrawal internally as unease, restlessness, or a subtle but persistent feeling that something no longer fits. Their tolerance for superficial explanations diminishes. Their motivation becomes unstable. Their participation in social roles feels increasingly artificial. This is not collapse. It is early adaptation. Jung believed that consciousness does not expand uniformly across a population. It moves unevenly, touching some psyches earlier than others. Those it touches first often feel disoriented, isolated, or burdened, not because they are malfunctioning, but because they are encountering material the collective has not yet acknowledged. As 2026 approaches, sensitive individuals may feel an intensification of this dissonance. Work that once felt acceptable begins to feel empty. Conversations that once felt engaging begin to feel repetitive or scripted. The noise of modern life becomes harder to tolerate, not because it is louder, but because it carries less meaning. This creates a specific kind of fatigue, one that does not come from effort, but from incongruence. The sensitive psyche cannot remain energized by systems that require sustained self-division. Jung warned that when outer life no longer mirrors inner reality, The psyche responds by pulling energy inward, forcing reevaluation. For sensitive people, this inward pull often manifests as withdrawal, heightened dream activity, emotional sensitivity, or a deep need for solitude. These are not symptoms of pathology. They are signs of psychological reorganization. Sensitive individuals are, in effect, being asked to slow down internally while the world continues to accelerate externally. This creates a painful split. They may feel alert and disengaged at the same time, aware that something significant is unfolding, yet unable to name it or share it meaningfully with others. Jung noted that those who encounter emerging truths too early often suffer not from the truth itself, but from the absence of a shared symbolic framework to hold it. This is why sensitive people often feel lonely during transitional periods. They are living with awareness that has not yet become collective. As the pressure builds toward 2026, these individuals are not meant to predict outcomes, warn others, or impose meaning on chaos. Their role is quieter and more difficult. They are being shaped into containers. Psyche is capable of holding uncertainty without collapsing into denial or fanaticism. Jung believed that individuals who can endure psychological tension without fleeing into rigid belief systems become stabilizing forces during periods of upheaval. Sensitive people feel this coming shift first because they are already practicing this endurance, often without realizing it. They are learning how to remain internally coherent while external structures lose credibility. This learning is exhausting, but it is not accidental. Awareness always arrives before understanding, and understanding always arrives before renewal. What sensitive people are feeling now is not doom. It is preparation. They are not broken by the times they live in. They are being quietly reoriented for what comes after the reorganization is complete. Carl Jung believed that when an individual or civilization reaches a point where old meanings collapse, the psyche does not simply fall into chaos. It enters a process of psychological rebirth, though this rebirth rarely feels hopeful while it is happening. According to Carl Jung, the psyche follows a pattern similar to nature: growth, stagnation, decay, and renewal. What we experience as crisis is often the psyche's refusal to continue living inside structures that have lost symbolic life. During collective crises, this refusal intensifies. The old stories that once organized reality about success, progress, identity, and certainty begin to feel hollow. People still repeat them, but without conviction. Jung described this stage as one where symbols die before new ones are born, leaving consciousness suspended in uncertainty. This suspension is deeply uncomfortable because the human mind craves orientation. When meaning collapses, anxiety rises, not because danger is imminent, but because the psyche no longer knows how to interpret reality. As 2026 approaches, many people will feel the symbolic vacuum. Familiar explanations stop working. Old ambitions feel strangely irrelevant. Even rebellion feels scripted. This is a psychological death that precedes rebirth. Jung emphasized that rebirth does not occur through optimism or planning, but through disintegration, the breaking down of identities, values, and assumptions that once provided structure. This disintegration is often mistaken for nihilism or decline, but it is neither. It is a clearing process. The psyche is stripping away what is no longer alive. During this phase, people may cling desperately to certainty, ideology, or nostalgia because the unknown feels intolerable. Others may dissociate, distract, or numb themselves to avoid the discomfort of not knowing. But a smaller group, often the sensitive, reflective, and inwardly oriented, remain present within the uncertainty. Jung believed these individuals are essential during transitional periods because they can tolerate ambiguity without needing to resolve it prematurely. Psychological rebirth requires time spent in darkness, much like a seed underground. There is no visible progress, only inward rearrangement. This is why collective rebirth always feels chaotic from the outside. There is no clear direction yet, only tension. Jung warned that if societies attempt to skip this phase by imposing artificial meaning, the result is fanaticism or regression rather than renewal. True rebirth emerges organically, when enough individuals have confronted their own inner contradictions. As the years leading into 2026 unfold, this confrontation becomes unavoidable. People will be forced to ask not what they believe, but why they believe it, not what they pursue, but what actually sustains them. Psychological rebirth does not promise comfort. It promises honesty, and honesty destabilizes before it integrates. What is being born through this process is not a new ideology or system, but a different relationship to consciousness itself. Jung believed the future humanity depends not on technological advancement, but on whether individuals can integrate unconscious material without projecting it outward. The rebirth taking shape now is subtle, internal, and uneven, but it is real. And like all genuine transformations, it begins not with answers, but with the courage to remain conscious while the old world dissolves. Moving through the psychological pressure surrounding 2026 will not require prediction, preparation, or certainty. It will require orientation. According to Carl Jung, when the external world becomes unstable, the psyche must shift its center of gravity inward, not as an escape, but as a stabilizing act. This does not mean withdrawing from life or disengaging from responsibility. It means refusing to let outer chaos dictate inner coherence. As collective structures lose symbolic authority, many people feel unmoored, reactive, or desperate for guidance. The temptation during such times is to attach oneself to loud narratives, rigid beliefs, or absolute answers. But Jung warned that premature certainty during periods of transformation leads not to clarity, but to possession by ideology, fear, or projection. To move through 2026 without losing yourself, you must cultivate the capacity to hold tension without rushing to resolve it. This requires slowing down internally even when the world accelerates. It requires learning to distinguish between information and meaning, between stimulation and truth. You may need to simplify your life, not outwardly, but inwardly, reducing the number of voices you allow to shape your perception. The psyche needs silence to reorganize itself. Reflection becomes more important than reaction. Dreams, intuition, and emotional responses become signals rather than distractions. This period asks you to become more selective with your attention, your energy, and your emotional investment. Not everything deserves engagement. Not every conflict is yours to resolve. As pressure increases, so does a need for psychological hygiene, solitude, honest self-examination, and grounding practices that reconnect you with your body and inner rhythms. This is not spiritual bypassing. It is containment. You are learning how to remain present without becoming overwhelmed, informed without becoming consumed, and aware without becoming cynical. The goal is not to transcend the world, but to remain undivided within it. Those who move through 2026 intact will not be the loudest or most certain, but those who can remain inwardly aligned while uncertainty unfolds around them. What 2026 ultimately represents is not a moment in time, but a demand placed on consciousness itself. The demand is simple, but not easy: to become more honest. The psychological pressure building toward this period is not designed to destroy meaning, but to strip away meanings that no longer carry life. What remains may feel sparse at first, quieter, slower, less dramatic, but it is more real. As old identities dissolve and collective illusions lose their grip, individuals are asked to take greater responsibility for their inner world. Blame becomes less satisfying. Distraction becomes less effective. Performance becomes exhausting. In their place, something quieter emerges. Discernment. You begin to recognize what is yours to carry and what is not. You stop trying to stabilize the world emotionally. You stop explaining yourself to noise. You stop mistaking intensity for truth. This is not withdrawal from humanity. It is maturation within it. The people who move through this period with integrity will not feel triumphant. They will feel grounded. They will not have all the answers, but they will trust their orientation. They will understand that meaning is not something handed down by systems or eras, but something cultivated through conscious relationship with oneself. The future does not belong to those who predict it, but to those who can remain psychologically whole while it unfolds. 2026 is not a test of intelligence, resilience, or belief. It is a test of integration. Can you remain aware without becoming rigid? Can you remain open without becoming fragmented? Can you remain human without losing yourself to fear or abstraction? This is what the moment asks. And those who answer it quietly, inwardly, and honestly will become the stabilizing presence others unconsciously seek, not because they control the future, but because they are no longer at war with themselves. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care of what is truly yours.